We stand for the gospel reading. What happens when entertainment goes horribly wrong? I want to talk about that in the homily today. So I've chosen a reading that illustrates that. What happens when entertainment goes horribly wrong? So I give you the backstory to it before I read it. It's the story of Herod, Herodias, and Salome. And the story is that Herod's brother Philip he had a title, but he had no territory. And he's married to a woman called Herodias. Herod, on the other hand, is the tetrarch of Galilee. He's got a title and terrain. So at one stage, Herod falls in love with his brother's wife, with Herodias. And he persuades her to divorce her husband Philip and to come marry him. And she's very happy because now she's going to get a title and land as well. And she's a very ambitious woman. And so John the Baptist is not happy with this scenario. And he keeps preaching publicly that Herod is sinning by marrying his own brother's wife. And Herodias is not impressed, and she's trying to kill him. But Herod is afraid to kill John because John is really, really popular. So he reaches a compromise. He puts John in jail instead. And then on one occasion, it's Herod's birthday, and he throws himself a big, big birthday bash. And he gets totally plastered during the bash. And at that stage, Salome, a young girl, comes in, Herodias' daughter, and she dances very seductively for the crowd. And Herod in his cups swears an oath, "I swear I will give you anything you want. Ask me, even half my kingdom, and I'll grant it." And the girl consults her mother, and her mother says, "We have him. Tell him you want John the Baptist's head on a platter." So the girl goes back to Herod and she says, in front of the whole group, "I want John the Baptist's head now on a platter." And all of a sudden, Herod sobers up very, very quickly. But he's stuck because he's made an oath in front of everybody, and he figures better that John lose his head rather than that I lose face. So he sends to the prison, they chop off John's head, and they bring it back and they give it to the girl, and she presents it to her mother. So here's Mark's account of the incident. King Herod heard about this, for Jesus' name had become well known. Some were saying, "John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, and that is why miraculous powers are at work in him." Others said, "He is Elijah." And still others claimed, "He is a prophet, like one of the prophets of long ago." But when Herod heard this, he said, "John, whom I beheaded, has been raised from the dead." For Herod himself had given orders to have John arrested, and he had him bound and put in prison. He did this because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, whom he had married. For John had been saying to Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." So Herodias nursed a grudge against John and wanted to kill him. But she was not able to, because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. So when Herod heard John speaking, he was greatly puzzled, yet he loved to listen to him. Finally, the opportune time came. On his birthday, Herod gave a banquet for high officials and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. When the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guests. Then the king said to the girl, "Ask me for anything you want, and I'll give it to you." And he promised her with many oaths, "Whatever you ask, I will give you, up to half my kingdom." She went out and said to her mother, "What should I ask for?" "The head of John the Baptist," she answered. At once the girl hurried back to the king with the request, "I want you to give me right now the head of John the Baptist on a platter." The king was greatly distressed, but because of his oath and his dinner guests, he did not want to refuse her. So he immediately sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. The man went, beheaded John in the prison, and brought back his head on a platter. He presented it to the girl, and she gave it to her mother. On hearing of this, John's disciples came and took his body and laid it in the tomb. Words inspired by God. Last Sunday, I used an archetype for incarnation, the archetype of the journey, that in many, many great wisdom traditions, the journey is a great archetype of incarnation or journey through life. And I suggested that sometimes it's very important to get lost, that we learn sometimes more from getting lost than we do from just going straight to our destination. So today I want to pick up that theme, but I'm going to pick up a different archetype. I want to pick the archetype of life as a drama to speak about incarnation as well. And I want to suggest also that sometimes in the drama of life, making mistakes or screwing up can be as important, as being perfect in a straight line. I don't know how many of you during your school days or college days were involved with theatre, whether you were actors. Yeah? Okay. I can well imagine that, Lisa. Okay, Lawrence. Yeah, Margaret, great. I love to do it. I did a lot of acting in high school and particularly in the seminary, probably about maybe 20 different dramas in the course of 10 or 11 years. And it's interesting that from all of those acting, all of those plays, the 2 or 3 that stand out for me were the ones where I really screwed up. So I want to share a few of those with you this morning. My first acting part of all was, I was a small kid. It was 1961. I went to a school in Cork called the North Monastery. It was a Christian Brothers school. It was known locally as the Mon. And the Mon was built in 1811. And now we were celebrating 150th anniversary in 1961. Now, it was founded by a guy called Edmund Ignatius Rice. And before he founded the Christian Brothers, he founded it in 1802. Before he founded the Christian Brothers, he was a very, very important and wealthy businessman with a fleet of ships that went all over the world. And on one occasion, he rescued a little orphaned African boy and brought him back to Waterford in Ireland, where he lived. And so for the 150th anniversary, one of the Christian Brothers had created this huge big play, representing the life of Edmund Ignatius Rice. And I had the part of Edmund Ignatius Rice's gentleman's personal gentleman. I was like his Jeeves. And my first line was this: on encountering this little African kid, rescued, by Edmund Ignatius Rice, I was supposed to say to him, though your skin is black, your innocence shines through. On the very first night of the performance, I'm really sweating. There's a huge crowd out there, and I stammer out, though your skin is black, your ignorance shines through. Not a very auspicious start to a thespian career. That was my first one. Later on in that year, we put on a huge big drama of the life of Christ. And the climax of it is on stage, there's a crucifixion scene on stage with a huge, literally a 10-foot high cross, real solid wood, on stage. And Jesus is on the cross, and he's impaled with his hands. What's happened is we've got 2 huge big nails driven into the wood, and he's got them caught between his index and middle finger. So as far as you can see, all you can see is the nail sticking out, and he's hanging onto these. And there's a tiny little wedge-shaped platform on which he's standing, and that's about 4 feet off the ground. And the guy doing that was a really, really good actor. My job, I was the centurion. And my job was when Jesus had finished talking to the Father and saying, into your hands I commend my spirit, I was supposed to jab my spear into his side, and there was a little sachet of tomato sauce plastered on there, so I would puncture that, and it would bleed proportionally, and everybody would go, ooh, and oh, whatever. So for the first 3 or 4 nights, I was dead happy just to puncture it and get on with it. By night 4, I'm getting kind of bored because I didn't have a speaking part much. And so on night 4, Jesus is hanging on the cross, and he's still talking to his daddy, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. And I'm bored out of my mind, so I start tickling him with the tip of the spear. And Jesus starts wriggling on the cross, loses his foothold, and crashes onto the stage. There's this gasp from the crowd, and the curtain comes down, and a Christian brother rushes out from backstage and beats the crap out of me. Meanwhile, Jesus is covered in bruises that hadn't been inflicted by Herod or anybody else, and he has a sprained ankle. And I'm thinking, this great thespian blessing, break a leg, you know that? We almost did it. Move on to the seminary, and I'll just take one drama I was involved with in the seminary. It was called Hadrian IV, and it was the story of the only English pope, a guy called Nicholas Breakspere, who was elected pope in 1154, and he ruled for 5 years. And this play was in the seminary. We were responsible for every part of it. We'd have to make all the props, do all the painting, painting our faces, etc., and making the stage itself. And the flats, the props, you know what the flats are? The flats are the pieces that are angled to the audience so that the actors can exit and enter the stage without seeing what's backstage. And they're angled this way, so the audience can't look back, can't look into it. And so we've done all of the props, and we've created this great stage, and the local community would come in to watch these performances, and typically they'd run for about a week. And the climax of this entire play, Hadrian IV, is the pontiff has just died, and 4 of us cardinals are carrying him on our shoulders. We've got a stretcher, one guy in front, guy behind, guy over there, guy there, 4 of us, and we're stretchering the dead pontiff very solemnly across the stage and making our exit, stage left. Very, very solemn, with great solemn music. And the guy who was doing Adrian IV was a very good actor, a guy called Billy Kennefick. He was a late vocation, and he'd for many, many years been part of the Cork Shakespearean troupe. Really first-class actor. And Billy is lying in state with his mitre on, and the 4 of us cardinals are walking across the stage. There's only one problem. The flats hadn't been created during the dress rehearsal, so we're meeting the flats for the first time, and they're wrongly made. There's not enough room to get through. So we get across, we don't realize that. We get to the far side, and we can't get off stage. And we kind of look at each other, and we get a brainwave. So there's the stretcher, and there's Billy lying in it. So the 2 guys on the inside, we tilt up our side slightly, and the guys on the outside tilt their head down, and we manage to squeeze through. But Billy rolls off, and this is about 5 feet, thumps onto the ground, and he's got false teeth. The false teeth jump out, and they land in the lap of the woman in the first row. So they're the 3 plays I remember over all the 20, the ones where we majorly screwed up. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. Life is a drama, but sometimes we learn much more from the screw-ups than we do from our best performances. So I just make 2 main points this morning. The first one I call incarnational actors, and the second one then feedback from the screw-ups. So incarnational actors. So I'd say of all the psychologists I've ever read, my 3 favorites easily are Gautama Siddhartha, the Buddha, Jesus the Christ, and William the Shakespeare. I don't have any 3 other human beings who know the human psyche as well as these 3 people did. They really, really understood the human psyche. And Shakespeare put it very, very famously in one of his plays, As You Like It, where he says, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. We have our exits and our entrances. Each one in his lifetime plays many, many parts. So he regarded life itself as a stage, and he was really, really good at understanding it. Now, I really believe that, we come to Earth, I've said this many, many times, we come like a Shakespearean troupe. All the important people in your life are there by design. We have made these preconception contracts where we decide to come onto planet Earth at the same time. And I've suggested that there are many, many levels to this, like ripples on a lake. There's firstly your soulmate, then there's your family of origin, then there's your friends, then there's your community, then there's your tribe, then there's your nation, then there's your species, and finally all sentient beings, everything that's alive in our universe. So we're there by design. And before we incarnate, we know the track record of everybody we're coming with. There are no surprises here. We know exactly who we're coming with. And we know exactly the times into which we're being dropped. There are no surprises. Either sociological surprises or political surprises, economic surprises, whatever. We're dropped into a position and we know exactly what we're coming in to do. And we make this agreement. And we choose to have people in our lives from 2 different kinds of soul pods. Friends of ours who love us unconditionally, and they're really, really good for our self-esteem. And then what I would call the shadow pod. We bring people in from another part who are going to test us and be difficult for us in the course of a lifetime. And these are just as important as the friendship group, because they'll stretch us in ways that the others won't. If we only had friends who love us unconditionally in our lives, we'd all become narcissists. So we need a little bit of weeding. All of us need weeders in our lives. And we perform that function for other people. There are people who regard us as the weeders, that they don't like us very well. And there are people in our lives that we regard as the weeders. But we come in this group, and we know exactly what we're coming to do. The first thing is to wake up to the realization of who we are and to try to create Christ consciousness in our world. And we realize that since everybody is there by design, cursing anybody out or getting angry with anybody is totally useless. You've designed these people. Even on the international stage, you've designed to come in with these characters in place because you are trying to learn something, either patience or forgiveness or compassion or courage or a sense of humor, whatever besides waking up you've come in to do. And therefore, berating people, getting angry with people is totally useless. You came in here intending to grow. Now we need to grow. The trick is that when we come into life, the drama of life is not, it's improv theatre. There is no script and there is no plot. You are just dropped in here. We know the track records of everybody, and now we have to interact with each other. And whatever people do, we have to try to respond to it, and that's how the play unfolds. So I told you, I once had a client who was a professional actor, and his specialty was improv theatre. And he told me there are 2 rules to good improv. The first rule to good improv theatre is that you never reject a line that your partner offers to you. So when you're on stage and somebody gives you a line in improv theatre, you have to work with the line. You can't say, that's a dumb thing to say. Give me a different kind of cue. You can't do that. And that's what's called in spirituality the practice of the present moment. You can only get to where you want to go by starting from where you're at. You can't start from some place that you're not at. And so the present moment is very important. You have to work with the lines that the partners, whether it's an individual person or whether it's a politician or whether it's the global situation, you have to work with the situation in which you find yourself. There are no surprises in the sense that you came into this to develop particular kinds of virtues. Now get on with developing these virtues. So you cannot reject a line. You cannot reject a person. You cannot reject a situation. You can change the situation, you can work with the situation, but you cannot reject it, or you cannot reject the players in the drama. You have to work with what you have, and through love, allow everybody to make their journey into Christ consciousness. And the second great rule of improv theatre is that, as well as accepting every line, you have to try to make your partner look good. You have to speak lines that make the other guy look good, not lines that make you look good. You create a line that makes you feel really, really important, and you deflate him in the process, the whole play is going to fall on his face. So your job, you know the strengths and the weaknesses of your partner on stage, you feed her lines that you know that she's really going to be able to work with, that make her look really, really good. And she's going to do the same for you, and then the play takes off. And this is true also, I believe, not just in interpersonal dynamics. It is true there, very obviously. It's true also on the national and the international stage. Whatever actions I'm doing that's making anybody look bad is going to make the play crash. Whatever actions I'm doing that's going to make the other person reach to the core of their divinity is going to be good for everybody. It's going to allow them to access their own divine nature. But if I speak the lines that crush them in some way, that make me look good and make them look bad, the whole thing is going to fall in his face. And again and again and again and again and again, the great avatars are telling us that message. Christ would say, love your enemies. He's not saying roll down and let people just walk all over you. He was saying that you're going to learn as much about yourself from your enemy's behavior as you're going to learn about yourself, from looking in the mirror. So it becomes really, really important that you feed everybody lines that bring the divinity out in them, not lines that make them angrier or make them kind of close up. It becomes really important at every level of the dynamic. Now, I would add a third rule to that myself, from my own experience in drama and elsewhere. And that is that once you have played to people's strengths and trying to make everybody access their own divinity, you now have to try to stretch your own performance and stretch the performance of others. So, for instance, if you try to play Macbeth this year the way you played Hamlet last year, you're just stagnating as an actor. You've got to bring a different Macbeth to your Hamlet of last year. So you must be stretching constantly from lifetime to lifetime and within a lifetime. And you have to allow other people to stretch as well. You know that you're a really good actor if finally you can say, like as Jesus said, to see me, Philip, is to see the Father. If you're a really good actor, it means you've understood who you really are. You're a divine being. And when people interact with you, they're interacting with love and compassion, and they see who's there. They see beyond the spacesuit into the spirit. They see beyond the dialogue into the soul. They see beyond the lines into the love. That we must stretch and allow other people to stretch as well. So for me, they're the rules of improv. But there are many problems if you're involved with acting in any way. And the first problem is people who tend to identify with the role. You get characters, and they may be good actors or bad actors, but they get so totally into the role that they can't let go of it. And so you come back to the green room when the final curtain call has happened. You come back into the green room, you take off your costume and your war paint, and you go out into the street, and there are guys who take the character with them. And they take it back home with them, and they take it into their relationships with them. They've identified with the role. If you identify with the role, you're closing yourself down. And that happens in society again and again and again. There are policemen who are identified with being, correctional officers or peace officers, whatever. And that's their whole identity. There are fathers who are identified with being fathers. There are priests who are identified with being priests. We're not any of these things. These are roles we play. But we play a whole variety of roles. The woman who's playing a mother to her little children is also playing a sibling to her brothers and sisters. And she's playing a friend to her friends. And she's playing maybe a teacher to her students. She's playing a lot of different roles. When we get identified with the role, we're in big problems. A soul can't be identified by a role. That is not who you are. So that's the first danger, to make sure that we're not identified with any particular role we're playing. The second one to realize is we can't even identify with the drama itself. This is Hamlet this year. It's going to be A Midsummer's Night Dreams next year. We can't get identified even with the drama. So there are many people, maybe the vast bulk of the population, who think that life on planet Earth is the totality of who they are and what they've come to do. It's not. It's a drama we've agreed to engage in order to develop Christ consciousness. When we identify with the drama, what is happening is we think that this world is all that there is. This world is Maya, illusion. And I don't mean that it's not real. I mean that it is an unimportant level of reality. It is nothing like ultimate reality, which is Christ consciousness or nirvana or self-realization. And so even identifying with the drama is a big mistake. Now, it doesn't mean that you're not expected to play your role brilliantly. You are. You have to play your role brilliantly. All of the relationships in which you find yourself, you have to play them to the best of your ability. But you can't identify either with the role or you can't identify even with the drama itself. You are much bigger than any drama of which you are a part. You are an eternal being, you were never born, and you will never die. You've been on this planet many, many times, in many different parts of human history, in different genders, different socioeconomic status, different ethnicities, and hopefully you've learned something about acting in all of these ways. When I say acting, I mean learning that the only thing that's real is love. And you begin to see ultimately it is God who's playing all of these parts. Ultimately, everything that is simply God in drag. We're all playing parts on God's behalf. So to make sure that we don't get identified with the drama or with the role. One other caveat that I find is that there are some directors particularly, and they want to take charge of the drama, and they want to force the actors to perform in particular ways. In fact, they want to turn the improv, they want to give you a script, and they want to give you a plot, and they want you to follow this predetermined plot. And that is not improv theatre, that is not life. So there are people in our lives. Very, very often, there are political leaders and there are religious leaders who are acting as to mow the script that they have written and to follow a plot, a predetermined plot that they have crafted. And that is not life. We're not here to follow anybody's script, and we're not here to focus on anybody's predetermined plot. We're here to try to respond in every situation as lovingly as possible and to make other people look good. So that'll be the first point I'd make. And my second point is this. I call it feedback from the screw-ups. It is so important to realize that often our greatest learning comes from our biggest faux pas, that's how we really learn. In fact, the two great factors in learning, I believe, are repetition and feedback. We learn stuff by doing it again and again and again, which is the importance of reincarnation. Nobody is going to learn life on planet Earth from one incarnation, in one particular costume, as a male or as a female, as black or as white or as Irish or as Zambian or whatever. We can't learn life from just one go at it. And so repetition, we do it again and again and again, and that's how we learn. And secondly, it's feedback, looking at the results of what we've put out there. So feedback is hugely important. And I would suggest that there are three kinds of feedback which are important. There's what I would call self-generated feedback, and then solicited feedback, and then thirdly, unsolicited feedback. So self-generated, what would that look like? Those of us who were raised Catholic well remember that typically on a Saturday morning, as little kids, we were herded into the confessional box. And you had to try to laundry list all the mistakes you'd made in the week before. What commandment did you break? So there was basically the 10 Commandments of Moses, and the 6 commandments of the church, and you analyze all 16, you figure out which ones did I break, how badly, and how frequently, and then go into the confessional and kind of list your list. Now, it's interesting that this was in some senses a ridiculous kind of an exercise, in some senses really, really great psychology. Carl Jung said famously at one stage, he said, 95% of my clientele is either Jewish or Protestant. There are almost no Catholics. And the reason he felt was that on a regular basis, Catholics had some kind of a cathartic, exercise called confession, where every single week they kind of confronted themselves against a particular list, so they didn't need a shrink to go and kind of straighten them out. They were doing it for themselves on a weekly basis. So there was some value to that. But the Jesuits a few years later came up with a much more interesting version. Instead of examination of conscience, where you kind of gauge your performance against 16 do's or don'ts, they talked about consciousness examine. With what level of mindfulness are you living life? So it's not like, which rules did I break? But how mindfully am I living? A very, very Buddhist notion. How mindfully am I living? Am I mindful of the thoughts that I'm entertaining? Am I mindful of the words I'm speaking? Am I mindful of the actions I'm engaging in? How mindful am I? And I found that a really, really powerful exercise. In fact, I incorporated it into my psychology practice. And very, very often, if somebody is working on an issue, I would say to them, here's what I want you to do. When you get out of bed in the morning, I want you to kneel at the side of your bed, and I want you to take this issue. Let's say it's a communication issue, or it's a habit they're trying to break, like eating chocolate. And I say, okay, kneel at the side of the bed and say, I will try to be really, really mindful today about this issue. Every time there's an occasion to communicate better, I'll try it. Every time there's an opportunity to resist eating chocolate, I'll try it. And then before you get to bed at night, grade yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. How mindfully did I live my day vis-a-vis this particular issue? And grade yourself, was there a 4 or 5 or 6? And I guarantee you, you do that for even a week, and you see a shift in the level of mindfulness that you bring to the issue. So they were right on the money. So this mindfulness examine, or like this consciousness examine, is a very, very important kind of level of self-feedback, self-generated feedback. It's a way of you gauging how Buddhist-like, how much you're in touch with your Buddha nature or your Christ consciousness, by taking issues that are troubling you in some way or other, and then mindfully living your day with regard to that particular issue. So I would call that self-generated feedback. The second kind of feedback would be solicited feedback, where you engage somebody like a spiritual director or a friend of yours or a counselor, and part of their job is to reflect back to you what they see you, how they see you, what you're doing and saying and thinking. And you're asking them for this kind of feedback, and presumably they're trained enough and they love you enough to be able to give it gracefully and lovingly, that they're not going to devastate you. So having such a person in everybody's life is very, very important. Somebody whom you trust, and you know somebody who loves you, but somebody who will be honest with you and give you real feedback, but do it in a loving way that doesn't devastate you. That would be the second kind of feedback, solicited feedback. And the third one is unsolicited feedback. It's going to come whether you want it or not. They're going to be people who will get on your case. And sometimes they're family members, and sometimes they're enemy figures, and very frequently they will wildly exaggerate their criticisms, or they'll take great schadenfreude in your putting you down. But if you can try and mine what they've done for the nuggets there, particularly if you're getting the same kind of feedback from several different sources, there's bound to be something there. I mean, again, as a psychologist, you work with somebody who's been married 3 times, and now he's in his 4th relationship, and he's blaming the woman that, she's doing X and Y and Z. And I say, so how many times have you been married? 3 times. And you got divorced 3 times. If I were to interview those 3 women whom you divorced, what would they say about you? I don't know. So it's never my fault, They were all 3 bad women. I just managed 3 bad women. And now somehow I found a 4th one who's equally screwed up. So maybe I should bring her in and you could sort her out for me and we'll be fine. And I would say, there's only one common denominator between these 4 relationships. You. And you're the only guy in the room. I don't have permission or the right to change any of these women, but you've asked for help, I'm going to give you help. What are you doing that's contributing to the breakdown of these relationships? So whether or not it's solicited or unsolicited, you're going to get feedback from life. And if there's a commonality to the criticism that you're receiving in several different relationships, it's worth examining. Even if it's wildly exaggerated, and if these people are taking great pleasure in knocking you down, better that you look for the nugget of gold rather than kind of reject the whole thing. So that would be kind of unsolicited feedback. So to kind of wind up, it's important to realize that the mistakes are hugely important. The notion of sin in the New Testament is completely wrongly understood. We think sin is the breach of a covenant with God or the breaking of a commandment. That is not what sin is. Sin is a term in the New Testament that's taken as a metaphor from archery. It means to shoot at the target and to miss the bullseye. But that's very important because it's the feedback from where your arrow lands that allows you to adjust your aim. So feedback is huge. You're not going to get bullseyes unless you keep adjusting your aim on the basis of the feedback that you're getting from previous shots. So sins or mistakes are in fact the way of achieving some kind of perfection. So rather than saying, damn it, every time you miss the bullseye, you say, okay, I shot too far to the left, I need to move my arrow a little bit to the right. So sinning is really, really important. Sinning is not upsetting God at all. Sinning is like God, the grandmother, watching her grandchild learn how to stand upright and walk. And the little baby's going to tumble, 15 times. And 16 times, she's going to pick herself back up again. And the grandmother is going to clap every effort. Every fall, the grandmother will smile, and every time the child becomes homo erectus, the grandmother is going to clap. That's who God is. Sins, mistakes, are a hugely important part of the journey for us. And so to kind of act as if sins alienate us from God or condemn us to hell is the ultimate in bad psychology and the ultimate in bad theology. Which leads finally to the notion of perfection. Again, we mistake this notion from the New Testament. The word that's actually used in Greek is the word telos, from which we get the English word teleology. And teleology means to be attracted toward a goal, because we are as much products of our future as we are products of our past. We're not just totally driven by past actions into becoming who we are. We're pulled by future possibilities into becoming who we are. So teleology, or telos, or perfection, is not about a stainless steel sinlessness in which we never make mistakes. It's about a commitment to the goal of incarnation. In other words, becoming perfected means following the footsteps of Jesus. No matter how many times I fall, it's picking myself up because I know that I'm here as a soul on safari and that my job is to become a self-realized being, to develop Christ consciousness. So I pick myself up, just like that little baby who tumbles again and again. It becomes very important to have the courage sometimes to tickle Jesus on the cross and let him fall off. He's been impaled for far too long.